Okay, so really, so that's the question. How good are your teams? I think there's a whole lot of conversation. A whole lot of conversation that goes on at the moment. What we are finding with our clients is around, we do teams, and we've been doing teams for a long time, and we have lots of them. And if you ask that question, how good are your teams, and then how do you know? Then it's quite an interesting response. There's all sorts of ways that people think teams are great, in different interpretations. The last couple of years, I've been with lockdown and all of that stuff, having sort of worked in this space for a long time now. I decided to have a bit of a pause and see what's going on in the world around teams, because teams are on the roll, right? Teams for the last 5 or 6 years have just been hugely big focus on teams, and Deloitte studies and McKinsey studies and all around the importance of team. And so I decided, right, I'm going to do a bit of a look at that. And have you heard of the Global Team Coaching Institute, GTCI? That has started up in the last couple of years. So a couple of the gurus, the current sort of gurus the last 10 years, Peter Hawkins and David Clutterbuck, you might have heard of them, have pulled together GTCI with the mandate to build thousands and thousands of team coaches, because the world needs teams, and teams as we know, there's technique in teamwork, and teams need help because they aren't doing it well, actually. And so having gone down that track, and I was looking for, what are you doing differently? So through this training, I said, I'm going to go and do my own professional development. And they've started a whole ICF and EMCC have cottoned on to this whole team coaching as a professional discipline in its own right, and now have got the credentials through those organizations, professional coaching organizations. So their training program, which they have started, and they're not the only ones, Gateway Practitioner. So I've done the first 2 stages of that now, so at practitioner level, and I'm now on the faculty starting to teach some of what they're talking about in terms of the new thing about teams. Actually, the new thing about teams, can you flick back to the next one, please, Candice, is not a lot different to what we were doing in Winston, and we've been doing for the last 10 years. The roots are still the same around a lot of what was going on, has been going on in the world of teams and team development and team coaching. Now, one of the distinctions that they are pushing hard, which we've known about, is the thing about teams aren't an island in their own. The external world of their stakeholders are the critical part that they must be adding value to. And if you're not, your team's not going to get the support. And, in the end, you're not there for your own, just to have a nice time together and working lovely. But it is about performance. So the shift has gone away from with profiling around sort of an internal one team approach to teams, multiple teams, and impacting stakeholders, and the bigger systemic approach. So what that did for me was validate what we've been doing for the last 15 years. And the tool that here is as current as it's ever been, really, in the world of teams. So I love this. I love this phrase. This is our NZATD conference. Winston and I are from 2018, I think, actually, and it's a pathway to team performance. And we talk about building on a Belbin base in Team Alchemy. So Belbin is our go-to tool in terms of the intro phase, and then building on that and taking it through team architecture gives you a nice start. But if you want to go further than that, then the Team Alchemy approach has a lot more of the science and the analytics in behind it to actually show that we can measure teams and then clearly develop them if you know where you sit on the scale. So pracademic is a lovely phrase. I heard that there was a David Clutterbuck, and he goes, the most useful approach is to be a pracademic. So take what comes through academia and science and add a practical lens and a pragmatic lens, and then go to market. And if you are a pracademic, then that's because You have to adjust and adapt. There is no one single approach that is the best thing for every team. And we know in this complex world, all teams are slightly different. We know in just with the Belbin profiling, right? The balanced team might not be balanced, actually. You might need an overweight and an underweight in certain things and behaviorally. And then, but if you want that diversity piece and cognitive diversity, that's a big part of where the Belbin tool contributes. So this was so it's been a lot of fun. And so if we just flick on to the next one, and we'll just quickly, so this is our view is that the team piece is the building block. Team performance is the building block between individual performance and organizational performance. It's the link to make that happen. And there's a lot of talk now around value comes from teams. That's your value creation structure inside organizations. So it's a performance thing. It measures and tracks performance both within teams and between teams. And that's what we start talking about collaboration and teams of teams, and the gap in between teams needs to work and to get a seamless whole of organization approach. It provides a platform for embedding a high performance culture. It measures team members and their external stakeholders. So it's not just a solo team approach. And the social aspect of work gets picked up on this as well. So traditionally, team and relationship stuff and task and relationships important, but also we need to do the whole piece around fulfillment at work. And people and knowledge workers in particular in the workplace are looking for fulfillment. They need to be growing. They need to be productive. They need to be engaged in all of those things. So that's the sort of the high level, the link of where that fits in. The good to great piece is you can go, you'll go okay for a while, but that really high level in this complex world is an elusive goal, actually, without a structured and a systematic approach. So let's just flick through. I'm going to flick through a couple here. So that you can see here, that's just a really quick slide around the traditional approach to teams and team building versus a systemic approach, networks of teams, statistical analysis, positive psychology, that's strengths-based, right, which is Belbin has always been strong on. Team plus a performance focus rather than just a relationship focus with return on investment. I'll talk a little bit about that. The collaboration piece with your key external stakeholders, KES, key external stakeholders. That piece is critical. And there's a life internal measurement versus external and internal, and rather than a snapshot, follows the life cycle of teams as they evolve. And we all know that people in the workplace now can be a member of 4 or 5 different teams, right? And they come and they go, and teams morph, and they get created, and then they disappear, and then in that life cycle approach, there's different things that need to happen at different stages if they're going to be effective. Next slide, please. Okay, so just the system itself has, just flick this open fully, I think here, Candace, please. So there's the 5 components as the model, a life cycle, the diagnostic that we talked about, which measures the internal and external, a toolkit of online activities and workshops and frameworks. And so Terry, I think your point around how do you deliver this stuff is that's partly captured in some of that. And the facilitator coaches, where we have an accreditation process for that, and the support that goes with what does it mean to work with our clients using a framework like this. Now we designed it, it's been designed as a framework. So if you've got a lean angle, or if you've got the old school Six Sigma angle, or you're an agile, there's room to bring that into a performance framework. So and there's more detail on that. Okay, just flick on to the next one. I'm going to go, that's the definition of team effectiveness, 3 things. So it's a state of high performance that all the teams must have, and this goes across. This is based on the 2004-2010 period of best practice research when we were looking at what's going on in the world of teams, who are all the big thinkers. So Hackman, Belbin, obviously early on, but Hackman, Lencioni was really early, but after that, people like Ruth Wagerman that's coming on now. Then in the last few years, you've got Amy Edmondson, and you've got Hawkins and Clutterbuck. So all of those things that have in common, three things. You need outstanding results. You need synergistic relationships. In other words, the connection piece. And individually, we want deep fulfillment from working and learning together. And the learning together is the key piece around ongoing sustainable stuff for teams. How do you create that learning team? And then if we can wrap a whole system around driving towards that performance, then that's essentially what we did. So let's flick on. As a result of go again, Candice thinks I'm going to rush through this now because we can look at this later. That was the elements, 6 elements, the life cycle with norms and percentile scores. Next, please. And then it comes together through a whole dimensions around the life cycle across the top, and the definition and the elements down the left, and all the components. At what stage do we need to focus on what, and what will give you the biggest bang for your buck? So there's a whole approach around that. Flick on, please. And the diagnostic itself then is internal team members, external stakeholders. It's quantitative, there's qualitative, and there are comparators. So we've started doing some ROI stuff on this. Helps teams monitor, track, and compare their performance through their life cycle and through time. And we've got the validity and the reliability numbers in there as well. So flick on again. So this is just an example of the internal team and their scores. Next slide. You compare that team, which was the internal team at the top, to 2 of their stakeholder groups. And you can tell just by the color, there's clearly a difference around in the scores and in the elements around what's working and what's not working from 2 different perspectives. Our view is you need to be above the 70th percentile at the high level, what we call Team Alchemy, state of Team Alchemy, in both your internal performance as a team, and your stakeholders also need to see that. And if you haven't got both internal and stakeholders agreeing, you're not there yet. So because because of the importance of that external factor. Okay, so that'll do there. So here's a couple of ROI things. So this was here. We know along the bottom of the page there that Team Alchemy scores 1 to 5 scale, and percentiles. This is a client. This is actually a telco client, one of our early telco clients. 16 different teams, and we were tracking their scores, Team Alchemy scores. They were independently tracking up the y-axis customer sat for those teams. That's an independent measure. And they also knew the financial performance of each of those teams. So their business tasks around the financial side. And when we mapped all of that, the positive correlation between around, we know if you can get your team stuff going, there is a strong correlation with both your customer sat, external customer sat, and your business performance. Now, so that was one measure that we did quite early on. So that comes with when we start capturing. Now, not all organizations have done the linking between team performance and business performance. And so that piece right there is a big challenge, because getting access to organizational data to allow to do that has to be set up in the process when you're working with teams.
Bruce, I'm just conscious people are possibly having to go, but
Right.
are you guys okay for a little while longer, or do you have to rush off?
Yeah, no, good.
Okay. Go to the next slide, and then I'll dive into the Belbin research piece.
It's very interesting, and possibly we could pick it up again.
Absolutely.
I think let's.
The last 3 years, we've started capturing, as we survey the internal team members, we've been asking 3 questions, one around productivity, one around their personal growth, and one around how engaged they feel. So it's a really simple question. And we've been mapping their personal satisfaction, individual satisfaction around how well this organization and this team is contributing to my sense of being productive my growth and learning as an individual, and the discretionary effort piece around engagement. And you can see that there's I haven't drawn the trend lines in there, but you can see that if there is a positive correlation again around teams that work and teams that are performing well also have people who feel productive and are growing and are clearly that has a link to engagement. The engagement piece we've known for a long time, clearly around teams. So anyway, so that's some of the data that was starting to come out as well. So let me talk about the I'll then process around what we do when we're team coaching and we're taking teams on a journey, phase 1, 2, and 3. So diagnostics with development activities. The kickoff Belbin team roles gets applied in that first phase for us. We very often will start with Belbin when we're working with a new team, or the first when we start working with them. It's a really easy entry, and it's a really nice way to have conversations around teaming and how do we build on strengths and how do we manage weakness and tolerance and all of those things. So very consistent with psychological safety, but which lots of people are clearly, lots of people have been talking around that. Okay, next, thanks. Okay, and then through, that's just how we roll out the enterprise level implementations. We use a mix of internal team coaches, external facilitated coaches, which are people like us, and then the practitioners who are the leaders of the teams, and them having an understanding so they can be leader as coach partly along the way. Okay, so in 2018, I went and chatted with the Belbin folk, and they were looking to around this, how do we start playing in this space around teams and owning this whole team thing and shifting away from just being a provider of behavioral profiling through to influencing the performance. And they were thinking down that performance, starting to go down that performance track. And there was a bit of resistance for quite a while, and it's really only kicked in, and they've started to really own that space. So this was a study. So we had 2 data sets, and this is House of Travel, actually. This is our client, House of Travel. We had 2 sets of data, and so there's just so with this one example, we had Team Alchemy scores for all their teams. So we had 20 teams, and right through this is their main office, 20 teams. We had Team Alchemy data. We also had Belbin data. So we said to Vicky, who's the guru. Oh my God, Vicky is the guru in that Belbin global office. I said, Vicky, what do you think? And she and Joe looked at each other, and they're going, a little smile came over their face. Like, oh my God, we are looking for a hard metric that we can start thinking and looking at the impact that Belbin profiling is having on teams. Is there a connection? So so we sent the data up to them. Comprehensive performance measure. 20 teams and managers were measured according to the 6 Team Alchemy criteria. So that was, and using that as the model. Okay, next slide. So those were the 20 teams, and both internal blue and external stakeholder, that's the Team Alchemy scores, ranked from the highest performing team, Adventure Reservations in Auckland, lowest performing team, the Hot Management team. Right there, now you go, hello, senior teams they're a challenge in themselves, right? So so that was the data, that was the group of teams. Okay, next slide. Here's what came out. About the managers themselves. Managers, self-awareness. Managers of the highest performing teams had a higher ratio of strengths to weaknesses than their lowest quartile counterparts. And that was as observed by members of their teams. So that was about the observer, and that was the observers versus SPI. The key 91. So the top teams much more in terms of strengths than weaknesses. The key qualities: highest performing managers were more likely to be seen as conscious of priorities, confident and relaxed, practical, disciplined, reliable. Now you'll be familiar with those terms, right? In terms of the Belbin behaviors. The lowest performing teams more likely to see reluctant to allocate work, frightened of failure, impulsive, fussy, indecisive. Next slide. The teams themselves, those teams with a greater team role range perform better than teams of all-rounders. Now, the team role range is when you've got how strong is, if you take the team averages, how strong is their number one as a team, and how low is their number 9, and the difference. So it's the ratio between, it was the spread of inside our team, where have we got the strengths, what's the spread of strengths through the teams. So that was one thing that they found. Secondly, it confirmed and Belbin's original thinking, on average, the highest quartile teams were 10% smaller than their lowest quartile counterparts. And when it came to strengths, the highest performing teams had more strong examples of team roles spread among more candidates. You remember the strong example is above the 80th percentile in Belbin speak, right? If you are above the 80th as a plant or as a coordinator, if you're above the 80th, you are technically a strong example. So there were more of them in the high performing teams. Next one. Thanks. When it came to collaboration, and the collaboration is a big part of of course, of what teams need to do. Coordinators promote external collaboration. Team workers promote internal collaboration, right? So the higher the team's coordinator scores, the higher their external collaboration performance, particularly if the leader was also a strong coordinator, because the leader does the interface with the stakeholders quite often. The higher the team's team worker scores, the higher their internal collaboration, their internal teaming was going on. Now so that came through quite strongly. Okay. Adaptability and change. The highest performing teams scored significantly higher for willingness to adapt, and they corrected errors than did the lowest performing teams. So when it comes to weaknesses, the best teams were more fearful of conflict, over talkative, indecisive, which you go, that's weird, right? The worst performing teams, inflexible, manipulative, oversensitive, pushy, skeptical. Now, it's an interesting comment. This is Vicky's analysis, having looked at that. She goes, the last couple there, whilst the high performing teams were fearful of conflict and indecisive, they tended to communicate more and were able to adapt and catch errors which might otherwise have compromised success. That's the essence of a lot of coaching. What happens in your meetings is a lot around that. The lowest performers, on the other hand, were more likely to approach change with skepticism and inflexibility, and were therefore perhaps at a disadvantage when responding to changing circumstances. So that was around, in terms of the different teams on the scale.
So we got a question there.
Yeah, Bruce, the fearful of conflict and things like that, there was a previous slide where they were deemed to affect low functioning teams. Previously you talked about on a previous slide, so you know what I'm saying? Yeah,
I do, in this one here.
Yeah. So how does that work then?
So this is about the managers specifically, this slide here.
I've got you.
And the other one was around the teams. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
That's around the team, yeah. Now, what they're also saying is you won't get a perfect team. Even the top teams have allowable weaknesses. It's what they do and what they do with them is the critical piece, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, thanks. Next slide. Okay, so in conclusion, this is the sort of just a really simple conclusion. I mean, some of the data, happy to share some of the data and the reports and things if anyone's interested. In general, the teams who perform best have managers with coordinator and shaper tendencies, and plenty of implementer and completer finisher behaviors distributed within the team. These were not senior teams. These were functional working teams. Keep that in mind, all right? The most successful teams were willing to adapt and discuss when the path ahead was unclear. The least successful were inflexible with grouping of observer words which indicated distrust. So there's a coaching opportunity, right? Or a selection opportunity. And then team size, we talked a little bit about the team size as well. Smaller is better, but also the ratio of list A to list B was interesting when you looked at the numbers as well, for those who are keen on numbers. I think that's it. Candace,
Yeah,
I think in terms of
the end.
time, I think we're probably
Brilliant.